Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating recent segment from Sky News Australia featuring columnist Des Houghton. We're going to look exactly at how he analyzes current political tactics, rhetoric, and media narratives surrounding the One Nation Party, before taking a sharp turn into a heated debate over state education transparency. Now, our goal here absolutely isn't to take a political side. We are just meticulously unpacking the arguments and data points Houghton brings to the table and clearly mapping out the strategies being discussed.
All right, let's kick things off with a massive number that popped up right at the top of the broadcast, over $5 million. Now, what's really interesting about that number isn't just its sheer size, but what it represents, right? It's a tangible financial indicator of unexpected political momentum. This massive fundraising success for One Nation is framed as evidence that the party is currently on a roll, setting the stage for a much broader discussion on how they're navigating the current political landscape.
To make sense of all this, we're going to map out Houghton's analysis through four distinct themes. First up, One Nation's political momentum. Second, weaponizing rhetoric. Third, roster shifts in policy. And finally, we'll hit the ATR transparency debate.
So, let's jump right into Section 1, One Nation's political momentum.
According to the broadcast, Pauline Hanson recently saw a 2% bump in her polling numbers right after speaking at the National Press Club. The analysis notes that her approval ratings are up, going so far as to claim that she's now, quote, within a whisker of toppling Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. The crucial point being made here is that this isn't just background noise. These specific percentage shifts represent the potential for one of the biggest upsets in Australian political history.
But this surge isn't happening in a vacuum. The segment actively contrasts these rising poll numbers with some intense pushback from the media establishment. Houghton says commentators are basically sneering at her base, and he brings the receipts. He points to a Sydney Morning Herald columnist calling the party a cult, a letter to the editor labeling voters as cretins, and Paul Kelly over at The Australian arguing she just wouldn't make a good prime minister. It really highlights this sharp divide between rising public metrics and the media's pretty harsh characterizations.
And hey, the attacks aren't just coming from the press. They're coming from direct political rivals, too. Take a look at this recent hit from opposition leader Angus Taylor, who claimed Hanson is totally incapable of developing a plan for Australia. However, Houghton analyzes this attack through a strategic lens. He says this isn't simply a policy critique, it's a defensive tactical necessity. Because the coalition has been facing its own rough polling lately, Taylor kinda has to make these statements to shore up his own base against One Nation's momentum.
Which brings us to Section 2, Weaponizing Past Political Rhetoric. Look at this fascinating comparison. Past Labour Party attack lines are explicitly juxtaposed with One Nation's current, highly lucrative Fire the Liar campaign. The core argument here is that voters are getting fed up with the major parties, and One Nation is capitalizing on that by literally taking the exact same rhetorical weapons the Labour Party used in the past against the Liberals and pointing them straight back at Labour today. It is a brilliant study in political mirroring. Let's actually trace this timeline to really understand the mechanics of this strategy. Pointing back to 2021, Richard Marles publicly called Scott Morrison a liar 18 times at a single rally. Then later on, Jim Chalmers escalated things by calling both Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison pathological liars. Fast forward to today, and Houghton argues this exact history is coming back to haunt the Labour Party. One Nation is cleverly adopting those exact same tactics. It's a vivid example of how campaign strategies just get endlessly recycled and repurposed. All right, moving on to Section 3, Roster Shifts and Core Policies. The source material makes a really striking claim about Barnaby Joyce potentially defecting to One Nation. Why is that such a massive asset? Well, for starters, it would give the party deep credibility out in rural Australia where he's well-liked. Plus, as a former Deputy Prime Minister and Senator, he brings invaluable insider Canberra experience. Houghton argues this shift would allow rural voters to view the party as a much more legitimate force, especially since Joyce would be highly influential in shaping their actual policy direction. Now, navigating into some highly sensitive territory here, a direct argument is made connecting recent tragedies to voter sentiment. Houghton strictly argues that horrific events, like the Bondi massacre, have retroactively given Hanson's 30-year stance on immigration renewed credibility with certain segments of the electorate. The suggestion is that because she's consistently argued against letting in people with extremist views, some voters are looking at these events and deciding that, in Houghton's exact phrasing, in one way she's been proven to be correct. It's a highly controversial point, but is presented as a crucial piece of the explanation for her recent surge. But it isn't all just about leaning into hardline stances. It's about presentation, too. The Sky News segment notes that this expanding influence was deliberately solidified by Hanson's recent appearance at the National Press Club. Her delivery there was explicitly described as engaging and more moderate.
So it reveals this brilliant dual strategy. You maintain the core controversial policies that fire up the base, while simultaneously softening the public presentation to attract a wider, more moderate audience.
Now, taking a bit of a turn here, let's look at Section 4, the ATR transparency debate. To truly understand this completely different topic, we first need to define the metric at the center of the controversy, ATAR scores. That stands for the Australian Tertiary Admission Rank. Basically, it's a crucial scoring system used across Australia to measure both individual student achievement and overall school performance, mostly for getting into university. Haughton's entire argument in this section hinges on who gets to see these numbers and why.
Let's map out this argument regarding state government secrecy. On one side, we have what Houghton sees as the problem. Back in 2020, the Labour Party blocked the public release of these ATR scores. He claims this is driven by a fear of public scrutiny, essentially serving to hide schools that are performing very badly. On the flip side is his proposed solution, creating public school league tables. The stance here is that parents have a fundamental right to know where their schools rank. By making this data public, we could identify which schools urgently need more assistance, while also, actually being able to celebrate and pat the successful schools on the back.
Wrapping up this explainer, we've looked at the analysis of a party leveraging recycled fire-the-liar rhetoric, capitalizing on internal roster shifts and navigating heavily polarized media narratives, all while local debates over government transparency brew in the background. The source material leaves us with a really fascinating dynamic to consider. So, as you digest all of this breakdown, the final question you should ask yourself is, do these recycled attack lines, strategic rhetoric, and rapid policy pivots truly hold enough weight to sustain a massive political upset? Or are they just the inevitable, noisy realities of modern campaigning?